Good morning, all. Now, this is something a little bit different. I want to talk about what has been kind of the bane of my very existence here on this planet since I was the ripe old age of 21. Scratch that. 20. So I touched on the idea that, I was shooting heroin into my veins as a teenager and as a young adult, and luckily that's something that I haven't had even dreams of doing for the longest time. But certainly with no help of this damn medication that's been just a bloody pain every time I take it, every whole waking hour, man. So this is my third go of being on it, and I've been taking it for at least the last year. But let's start with the first. So the first time I went on it, I was on methadone, and for reasons that are complicated to get into, I went off of it. Like methadone, for those who don't know, is an extremely addictive medication. It's used typically in the treatment of people who are deemed like irreparable addicts, essentially. So people who have no second chances, no prospects, no hope of getting clean. That's what it's supposed to be used for. I mean, especially with COVID and, just harsh times getting harsher and harsher as, this shitball rolls downhill, in speed, and fentanyl runs rampant and just killing absolutely everyone in my city. Stuff like methadone is more liberally prescribed these days. I was put on it when I was 16 before I was addicted to anything else. It was kind of a knee-jerk reaction from my doctor when I told her that I had used Oxycontin a couple of times. So I get off of it. I went through 5 days of cold turkey withdrawals and a youth detox. It was a nice facility, so I had that, but otherwise, not a pleasant ordeal. Didn't sleep a wink that entire 5 days, except for kind of sparse instances of falling asleep for about 5 minutes, experiencing very intense REM cycles, and dreaming essentially that I was being chased by Pinhead and his gash of Hellraiser ghouls dressed in their BDSM gear and stuff, because I was watching all the Hellraiser movies when I was at this detox. And the reason I had to wait that long is Suboxone has a very nasty side effect called precipitated withdrawal, which is essentially withdrawal times 100. And I've been unfortunate enough to experience this precipitated withdrawal dozens and dozens upon dozens of times. Now, it is something so excruciating, it is considered to be if not the most painful, one of the most painful things anyone can experience. You will black out from the pain if you're not, projectile vomiting your guts out, you're blacking out from the pain. And in a way, this is good for some people because it kind of enforces with a consequence, a reason not to use. I found out back when I was first put on it that you could take it, and then if you were to ingest a short-acting opiate like Dilaudid or morphine, which is half-life 3 to 6 hours, you'd wait 8 hours before taking your next dose, you'd be fine, because it typically thrusts you into precipitated withdrawal if you ingest it with an opioid still in your system. I actually didn't go through precipitated withdrawal because of my own use, except for one time, which was just probably one of the worst instances I've had of it, but still, there was only that one instance. Most of the time I went through it initially was when I had gone through my first cycle of Suboxone. I had the emergence of fibromyalgia 6 months after using it, and there are a mountain of anecdotal reports, nothing clinically that says Suboxone has any correlation to nerve pain, but there are a mountain of anecdotal reports of people saying they started taking the medication, had no history of nerve pain, and then wham bam biggie bam, they got it. Then they report it to their doctors, they say, it's awful strange, I started taking this stuff and then started experiencing nerve pain. Fancy that, right? Well, doctors being doctors and oftentimes not wanting to look like they've shot themselves in the foot, and coincidentally blowing their patient's foot off at the same time. They'll say, oh, well, you must have something like fibromyalgia. And fibromyalgia, from my experience, that was the first thing out of my multiple nerve pain diagnoses that I was diagnosed with. And I've come to learn that it's really, it's a Hail Mary type of diagnosis. It's when they have no idea what is going on, and they give you a diagnosis. It generally entails you having pain in between your shoulders, your wrists, your ankles, and it's fleeting pain that kind of comes and goes. And what made me get off of it the first time was talking to all these people while waiting to see a doctor who were saying the same thing. And so I ended up on methadone, and then because I had a seizure related to taking antidepressants in the hospital, I had an irregular heartbeat, an arrhythmia, when they did an ECG on me. Which, a regular heartbeat while having a seizure? Go figure, right? Well, my ECGs have been regular since then, but they said, we're going to have to pull you off of all your medication because of this. And at the time, I was on methadone, Valium, and amitriptyline. So I was going through 3 different types of withdrawal: cholinergic, benzodiazepine, opioid withdrawal. Awful, absolutely awful. And they're like, okay, you have 2 choices. You can go on Suboxone and wait 3 weeks for the methadone to get out of your system, stay in the hospital, do it here. And I was like, hell no, I want to get out of this fucking place. So they're like, okay, well, you can go on morphine. And so I was like, well, I don't want to go on morphine. I don't want to be addicted to something else. I'm perfectly fine. I'm comfortable with being on methadone. And like, well, you see, methadone has what's been shown more of a chance of giving you heart-related issues in your 40s. And I was like, great. I'm in my mid-20s. I'll get off of it before I'm in my 40s. They're like, oh, well, that's not going to happen. Morphine, Suboxone. Take your pick. Do you want to shoot yourself with a 9mm, or do you want to shoot yourself with a 45? So I chose the morphine, and as soon as I started taking it, it was giving me terrible, terrible gastric reflux. Just this, my stomach felt like a laundry machine, just sloshing back and forth with acid reflux. My fingers started to become all gnarled and just stilted. It was not a good time. I felt like an old person with terrible arthritis. So, what are my options? Suboxone, that's all that's left. I'm out of the hospital by this point. So, I go, fine, I'll do it. And since they're giving me long-acting morphine, enough to kill 12 people, mind you, they put me on instant release. And I did that for a couple of days, I guess, for the beads to make their way out of my system. And I was telling them, these beads are still showing up in my stool. I don't know if I should be swapping from the instant release to the Suboxone yet. And they're like, no, that's fine. You're fine. And so they switched me when I was in pretty like nasty withdrawal. Certainly not the worst I had experienced at that point, but not pleasant by any stretch. And so I'm at home and I take my first dose of Suboxone, and I can feel that precipitated withdrawal because I'd had it once before. It's this feeling of just the coldest cold you've ever felt, the most assaulting cold you've ever felt, and it was just attacking me, and like it's like you can feel it in your bones, you can feel it bristling up against your skin, and so I just ran over to a heater before I started puking and blacking out, and I was just lying there shaking it. And so I get on the phone with my doctor, and he goes, like, well, if it happens again, A, take more Suboxone and power through it, which means more intense symptoms, shorter duration. Now, I didn't want to know what more intense than precipitated withdrawal potentially meant. So she was like, well, if it happens again, write it out if you're not willing to take that route, which I wasn't. So, and I had to get on into the stuff one way or another. So the next 5 days, I went into it another 5 times. I was in 5 days of no sleep, 5 days of just feeling the worst I've ever felt in my entire life. And I'd been through benzoin withdrawal, opioid withdrawal. As I said, I was through 3 types of withdrawal, including those 2 in the hospital. That didn't even scratch the surface of the nasty, debilitating symptoms I was experiencing. And yeah, I mean, like, it's that amount of pain is traumatic, and especially for someone like me who has, central nervous system sensitivity, which means that, my nervous system tends to perceive pain as being much worse than it is. It was pretty bad, and yeah, so I tell my doctor, like, hey man, like, these beads are still showing up in my stool, like, and I've been telling him this every time, and he's going, oh no, it's fine, it's working its way out of your system. But 5 days in, and it's still going on, and he's like, oh, and I was like, yeah, dude, what if they're getting, like, rectally absorbed or something? Because the way Suboxone works, if there's another opioid in your system, it's a partial agonist, so it's not something that, like, completely binds to your receptors, like methadone does, not right away anyways, but it is very competitive for your receptors, so it will fight with whatever is on your receptors to kick it off, and that's what makes you go into precipitated withdrawal. And it is god-awful. It was the worst experience I've ever had, and I've been unfortunate enough to have it multiple times, and through no fault of my own. Except for the one instance, the first time I experienced it, because I had bought like some Percocet the day before, and I had taken the Suboxone the next day, and I guess I just didn't wait long enough. So essentially, I suffered a lot to get on it, and now I'm suffering once again because well, exactly why, I don't know. I don't think anyone's quite sure at this juncture, but I know what's happening. And what's happening is they give me these shots called sublimate. They are essentially the same thing as Suboxone, buprenorphine, the active component. And they give you these extremely painful shots. They'll give you these 2 like bumps on you. And they gave me a pretty high dose the first time. I was fine for about 4 days. Because the deal is, like, it's supposed to last about a month. And you don't have to go through dissolving these massive, like, horse tablets under your tongue every single day. And, so it was fine the first 4 days. And here's the problem, though. I went up to Alberta. And, so I had nothing when I went into the withdrawal. When it stopped working on that 4th day, I spent the next about 4 or 5 days sleepless, in agony, my system was very sensitive, and it was minus 22 outside, so I couldn't go outside, and I couldn't, if I did, I would get frostbite. I got frostbite on all my fingers because of the rain always in my hand, which makes my hand very sensitive to cold, and, the poorer shape my immune system's in, the more sensitive I am, especially my hand, to stuff like cold. And so, I get my doctor to fax in some Suboxone up there and take it, feel a little bit better. Not A-okay, but a little bit better. And so I get back, and he arranges for me to do another one of these shots. And mind you, these shots are not fun to get. It's, 3 to 5 minutes of someone injecting a very painful gel slowly into your chest. And also these bumps they cause they're painful in themselves, and makes it like a real hassle to do stuff like crunches and other exercises that may end up stimulating your abdomen. And so I was like, there's really I don't want to go back on this. Please don't put me back on this. I show up to my doctor's office last time. What does he have waiting? Another dose. Another high dose of it. Fuck, dude, okay, I'll do this, but you promise me this is the last time you're gonna force this medication on me. So, I do it. Maybe get 24 hours of feeling okay. And what do you know? Back into withdrawal again. I'm back on the chain gang of cold and pain. So he prescribed me some Suboxone because he expected this to happen. Now, every time I've taken it so far, I have gone into precipitated withdrawal despite only having that buprenorphine from the shot in my system, supposedly. And if it is in my system, I'm getting a very minute amount. Precipitated withdrawal is not fun. You can't do anything in that state but just lie there and go, ow, fuck my life. It sucks. You feel like a sack of cold, rotting meat. Would not recommend it. And that's essentially where I am now. Is just out of another episode of it. And so I think it has to be said that these medications benefit a lot of people, and I am I'm an average dude on most frequencies, but I do have a number of nerve-related conditions. I do potentially have a compromised immune system. I get sick very easily. My system's very sensitive. So it could be just a matter of this being a me thing and not a Suboxone thing. But, as I said, I've also heard instances of people reporting some fairly, deplorable diagnoses that they've gained after ingesting Suboxone. Something that there's no trace of before they start taking it. And I also have a bit of a theory as to why Suboxone is even a thing in the first place. I mean, I know buprenorphine has been around for a long time, well before Suboxone was, and buprenorphine is the active ingredient in Suboxone. They do put naloxone in Suboxone, but that is only active if people crush it up and try to shoot it or snort it. So that's basically tamper-proof. It's a fail-safe in a way. A lot of people blame it for causing precipitated withdrawal because naloxone does cause precipitated withdrawal in people who they use it on to essentially reverse overdoses with. That's why people have to be very careful if they're using naloxone on someone. They have to know they're overdosing, because if they don't, what they're going to do is they're going to trigger the worst withdrawal this person's ever felt, and that person's going to go, fuck, I got to use some opioid right now to make this go away. Now, they have no tolerance left because naloxone is like, it's a full agonist, whereas Suboxone is a partial agonist, so it is really competitive for your receptors. It kicks everything off your receptors, so you have no tolerance left, essentially. And so people feel, because this is the worst withdrawal I've ever experienced, I need to use twice as much, which, ends up, they go deeper into an overdose than they were before. So, heed that. Just people who are carrying naloxone on their belt, I do that myself. I've only had to use it once, but I was damn sure this guy was not coming back any other way. And I know there have been people in my city who go around hitting just people nodding out on the street with naloxone. Like, that person's turning blue if they're non-responsive, they're not breathing. Then you have the green light. Otherwise, watch your step with that shit, because, it could be the difference between someone, getting close to an overdose, because when you're nodding out on an opiates are very rare these days, but regardless, that means they're close. They're close to an overdose, but doesn't necessarily mean they're there. Just throwing that out because it's an important point. It's the difference between life and death, essentially. Now, as for stuff like nerve pain, it clearly is not a phenomenon that occurs on a broad enough scale to be considered really that much of a risk for a lot of people, but it doesn't really seem to discriminate between who gets affected by it. So bear that in mind. And also, if you're an addict using opiates, if you can still get heroin anywhere in the world, except for maybe Afghanistan, consider, do you want to be on something for the rest of your life? Because that's what they prescribe these medications for. I certainly don't. I certainly regret being put on it at such a young age. But, I mean, yeah, right, my theory on Suboxone is because it was pushed by Purdue Pharma being the same who essentially started the opioid epidemic to begin with their liberal prescriptions for Oxycontin. That's what, I started using to begin with. That's what a lot of people started using to begin with, because it comes in a very innocuous form. You can easily, that's what I did, convince yourself it's any other pill. As I said, buprenorphine existed well before then, but it wasn't being used for this purpose. It was being used, I believe, for pain management in geriatric patients. And so, because of this precipitated withdrawal mechanism, when I went into precipitated withdrawal a few times, those are some of the only instances where I used fentanyl, because it was the only thing strong enough to cut through the Suboxone and make it stop. But that only perpetuates the issue, because you've got to get that Suboxone in your system somehow. But you will do anything to buy yourself temporary relief, and if you're an addict, an addict is most vulnerable when they're in withdrawal, let alone precipitated withdrawal. So I think that what happens is that this medication is touted as a miracle drug for people on stuff like Oxycontin. I mean, it sure came out around the same time where the opioid epidemic was starting with Oxycontin. And then people would get the precipitated withdrawal. So I gotta make this go away. I'm gonna shovel back as much Oxycontin as I possibly can. And it just creates this vicious cycle of use. Street use, withdrawal. I didn't really say that chronologically correct. And so use onto Suboxone, precipitated withdrawal, back onto street use. So it's that. just keeps rolling around those 3 points over and over and over. And it is, in that respect, almost a perfect product for a pharmaceutical company, because, you know, you are going to have customers constantly having to come back to it and who have no choice of getting off of it, because, you know, it's very, very, very hard to get prescribed stuff like methadone these days. Like, you know, the fact that I did it was kind of a fluke, really. As I said, since COVID, I mean, they're a little more liberal with that stuff, but they will try to get you on Suboxone first. I honestly, I don't want to be on any of them because I haven't used opioids for a long, long time. I've had no desire to, but I still have to pay for my use, like I'm using every single day. I still have to be in and out of precipitated withdrawal, and I think that is a fucking crying tragedy, man. Like, it really is. I mean, I've personally done a lot of work myself to shift my perspective, so it's like, okay, I really don't need these medications. I really don't need street opioids. They're really a waste of time, a waste of your life, a waste of your money. It's going to burn many bridges. Once you get far enough in, there's no coming back. I'm one of the lucky ones for getting out alive. But I'm far from out of the woods because I still have to deal with this. And no, I'm not relinquishing responsibility for, you know, my choices that I made when I was younger. But I do think in many ways I was conditioned into being an addict, because when they put me on that methadone, they said to me, like, you, if you take this, are an addict. In my mind, a 16-year-old's mind who loves drugs, that was, for one, a free high that I get every day, because methadone did get me high to begin with. Two, an excuse to be an addict. So, like, two very destructive inklings being put into my head, and that seeded into something very destructive. And I made a lot of bad decisions. I mean, I'm actually surprised I didn't make worse decisions, but still, shit I'm not proud of. Shit that has taken me years to work through. Behavioral patterns that, you know, I thought were going to be ingrained in me for life. You know, if it wasn't for, I'd say, psychedelics, which are helping to, like, repair my brain, rebuild synapses, build new synaptic pathways, I don't think I would have the outlook I have today on just, like, yeah, no, not for me. I don't need it. It's not for anyone, really. I wouldn't recommend anyone uses heroin or fentanyl or, you know, whatever counts for down on the streets these days. You know, I've seen too many people die. I died myself. I was in a pretty low down place, and I used to say, rock bottom. I jumped off of it like a trampoline, you know. But it is very confusing and it is very despairing when you had all these days of being clean. Like, I haven't been piss tested in years because they supposedly trust the fact that I'm not using, except for psychedelics and cannabis and occasionally ketamine. Because I tell them that. I try to be a very honest guy when it comes to that stuff. And I certainly haven't put a needle in my body in a long, long time. I'm not a guy who counts the days or anything, but I can say it's been at least a year, not 2 years. But I still feel like a junkie because of this Suboxone. And I fucking hate it with a capital H, man. And it feels like a cruel cosmic joke, you know. But that being said, I mean, it does work wonders for a lot of people, especially this sublimate shot, you know, because people get that month of relief, and they don't have to spend 2 hours a day letting these tablets dissolve under their tongue. You know, it's not as much of a ball and chain, so it seems, but it doesn't work for me. May work for you, may not work for you. I can't tell you how your body works, but I can tell you, and this is my story, and it's a very cautionary one, so consider these things before going on any of these medications, and consider what you want to spend your life dependent on, because, that is ultimately, at the end of the day, a huge factor. Like, if you don't take these things, you go into withdrawal, and they are very addictive. They're meant to block up your receptors entirely, so you can't get high from any other opiate or opioid, except for fentanyl. Fentanyl doesn't care about that. Fentanyl is just like, get the fuck out of the way. That's one of the reasons I think it's being abused as much as it is these days, and why heroin is essentially, a three-eyed albino fucking rhino in the West. It's because no one wants it anymore. They just want fentanyl. And I've done fentanyl. I personally, I didn't enjoy it very much. It felt like a numbing, anesthetized, whacked out of my brain sort of high. But when people want to be numb to the reality of their lives, their existence, their circumstances, I see why it's so desired. But in any case, that's my story, and this is like one of my top current struggle right now in life. So I figured I'd share. Bye now.